Okay.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. Welcome to the third session of this course on peaceful living, peaceful dying. And yeah, last week I introduced this meditation called the 9-point meditation on death, which is from the Lamrim, Stages of the Path. Actually, it's from Matisha. It was, I think it was Atisha who brought it to Tibet, and then it was transmitted in Tibet. And the 9 points are divided into three groups, three parts. And we did a meditation last week on the first of these three parts, which is about how death is definite, just contemplating that, yeah, everyone has to die. Death is something that happens to everyone. And so we need to accept that and not, deny it. And then tonight I thought we would meditate on the second of the three parts of the meditation, which I actually explained last week, but we didn't meditate on them. So the second part is on the uncertainty of the time of death, the fact that we don't know when death is going to happen. And in fact, it could actually happen anytime because there's so many different ways that death can happen. So I just talked about that last week, and then I said we would meditate on it this week. So I thought we could do that at the beginning of the class tonight. So we'll start as usual um, with visualizing the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, and then reciting the Buddha's mantra, visualizing light from the Buddha's heart coming into us, filling us completely, and helping bring about a positive transformation of our mind. So we'll do that, and then we'll go right into the meditation. And just before we start that meditation, as you probably know, it can be difficult, challenging to face this reality of death, and it can bring up emotions. And that's completely normal that different emotions might arise in our mind, like fear or sadness or, yeah, any different kinds of emotions, attachment, like the thought of leaving behind loved ones and everything in our life, can make us very uncomfortable and sad. So just know that it's normal to have emotions arising in the mind with regard to death. And it's also good to remember that emotions are impermanent. They're not permanent fixtures in our mind. They come and go like clouds in the sky. And so don't take the emotions too seriously. Like, sometimes an emotion arises in our mind and we may feel that, oh, this is something permanent. It's going to be there forever. It's never going to go away. And that's never the case. Emotions come and go. We can see that in our experience. So just remember, oh, this is something impermanent. It's not going to last forever. And that can help make it more bearable. Also, um, with difficult emotions related to death, um, if we become more familiar with death and more accepting of death, then our mind will become more comfortable, less, frightened and concerned and upset and so on. So that's part of the reason for practicing meditation on death, is so that we get to be more familiar with it, more comfortable with it. It isn't so scary, so disturbing. So just you can say those things to yourself that, yeah, right now I'm kind of uncomfortable about death, but I don't have to be that way all the time. I can learn to be more comfortable with it. And yeah, so don't deny or suppress emotions that arise. Yeah, that doesn't help either. They don't go away by, ignoring them, suppressing them. So notice them, be honest, acknowledge what they are, but also know that they are not permanent, that they will always be there. They come and go, and we can work on our emotions and gradually reduce the strength of them. Okay, so let's begin with visualizing the Buddha. So when we do a visualization of the Buddha, we imagine the Buddha being made of light, not like a statue made of metal or wood or marble or something, but like a real living being there in front of us, but also not living in the sense of having the same kind of body that we have with, skin and flesh and blood and bones. So instead, we imagine the Buddha's body made of light. So it's pure and transparent and radiant. You can think of a rainbow. When we see a rainbow in the sky, it can appear very bright and almost like we could touch it, but we know that it isn't something solid. So the Buddha's body is similar to that. It appears, it's bright, radiant, but not solid like our bodies. And if you have difficulty visualizing, if nothing appears, don't worry about that. Just try your best and be content with whatever you're able to get. The most important thing is to feel the Buddha's presence, to feel that the Buddha is there in front of you with all the wonderful qualities of enlightenment, like compassion for every living being in the universe, and wisdom that understands things as they are, is free of any confusion, any misconceptions, any disturbing thoughts and emotions. It's like a totally pure and totally transformed, positive state of mind. And so just try to feel the Buddha's presence with those excellent qualities. And it's good to feel that the Buddha cares about you, right? We all want to be loved and cared for and protected. And so we get that from the Buddha. Buddha's mind, the Buddha's attitude towards us, towards everyone, every living being, is nothing but pure, unconditional love and compassion, similar to that of a mother or father towards their little child. They're just totally dedicated to taking care of their child. Whatever the child needs, they will provide it. The Buddhas have a similar attitude towards us, but totally pure, no attachment and no disturbing emotions mixed in with their love and compassion. Just pure and unconditional love and compassion. So try to feel the Buddha as someone we can rely on, someone who can help us achieve our goals, our wishes. Be the best person we could possibly be. And help us generate the same qualities that the Buddha has in his mind. Universal love and compassion and wisdom and being able to help others. So we can become like that too, by relying on the Buddha and his wise advice and guidance. So now imagine light flowing from the Buddha into you, and you can imagine it coming in whatever way you want, however you want. But imagine that it fills you completely. Your whole body, your whole mind becomes filled with this light from the Buddha's heart. And this light represents the Buddha's qualities and realizations in the form of light. So as the light comes into us and fills us, imagine our negative qualities like our anger and our confusion, our attachment, and so on. These get purified, disappear. And our positive qualities are nourished so they can grow more and more, and we can become just like the Buddha, same qualities and realizations. So let's recite the mantra of the Buddha 3 times while doing that visualization. Ayata Om Mune Mune Maha Mune Soha. Ayata Om Mune Mune Soha. Ayata Om Mune Soha. So, so now we'll do the meditation on the uncertainty of the time of death. So do the best you can to stay focused on what I'm saying and contemplate these points. And if your mind wanders away to something other than what we're meditating on, then let go of that other object, that distraction, and bring it back to the meditation. Okay, so last week we meditated on the certainty of death, the inevitability of death. And that's something we might be able to accept. Yeah, I'm definitely going to die. However, then our mind may think, oh, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. So I don't need to worry about it now. But can we be sure of that? Can we be sure that death won't happen to us soon? So this is the main point, main topic of this second part of the meditation, the uncertainty of the time of death. Meaning that, yeah, we don't really know when it's going to happen. And there's 3 points to meditate on here. The first is that human lifespan is uncertain. So this means that as human beings, we are not guaranteed a certain number of years of life. It isn't the case that all human beings born in this world will live a certain number of years before they die. And that's easy to see because we all know people who have died at different ages. Yeah, even infants before the age of 1, before they even get a chance to walk and talk. They die of an accident or an illness or something. And then, children at various ages can die, teenagers can die, people in their 20s can die, and so on, up to 80s, 90s. Some people live beyond 100. So the age at which one dies is completely uncertain. So just think of some examples of people that you yourself have known who have died at different ages, different stages of their life. And probably some have died even before they reached the age that you are now. So, in light of these examples, is it wise, is it realistic to think that death only happens to people who are old? And I'm not so old, so I don't need to worry about death now. And then the second point is that there are many causes of death. And this can counteract another idea we may have that death happens to people who are ill, who have some terminal illness. And we may think that I'm healthy. I don't have any serious illness. So, I don't have to think about death. I'll probably live a long time. So that's not realistic because illness isn't the only cause of death. It's actually the main cause. The majority of human beings do die of some kind of illness, mainly like heart disease, cancer, strokes. So those are the main killers of people. But not everyone. There's lots of other ways that death can happen. So think of some examples of these. For example, there's natural disasters, earthquakes, floods, hurricanes. So some people die as a result of those kind of events. And others die due to human activity, things that human beings do. This can include war, violent crime, accidents that involve cars or planes or various kinds of machinery. So again, think of examples of, if you can, think of people you yourself have known and the ways in which they died, to get a sense that there's many different ways that people can die. And there's also some irony in that certain things that we normally rely on to stay alive and healthy can become the causes of death. For example, eating food. People sometimes die due to eating food that's been contaminated, tainted somehow, or they eat too much, or not enough, or people sometimes choke on their food and die before they're able to get help. Let's see if you can recall any examples of that. Likewise, medical treatment is meant to keep us alive and healthy, but that can also sometimes be the cause of death. People take the wrong medicine or they have some kind of reaction to medication, or they go into a hospital to be treated for one illness, and while they're there, they get another illness that can lead to their death, or they die during surgery. Even medical treatment can become a cause of death. And there are also cases of people who die in their sleep. They go to sleep at night or in the afternoon, take an afternoon nap, and don't wake up again. I know personally a number of people that had this experience, and the doctors didn't find anything wrong. They couldn't find any actual cause of death. So it's just kind of mysterious. This is rare, but it does happen. So what this means is not only is there uncertainty about when we will die, there's also uncertainty about how we will die, how it will happen. And the third point to contemplate is that our body and our life are actually fragile. And this might be opposite to how we feel. We may feel strong, full of energy, as if we could go on living for a really long time, nothing could interrupt this. But it doesn't take much. It doesn't take something like huge and dramatic to take away our life, take away all that energy and lead to our death. It doesn't require something like a tsunami wave or an airplane crash or a tiger, even something relatively small like a bullet. People sometimes die because of a bullet going into a certain part of their body. Or even smaller than a bullet are things like viruses or cancer cells, things that are so tiny we can't even see them with our naked eye. And yet, if they get into our system and start doing their thing, then in a relatively short period of time, they can lead to our death. Think about that and see if you can get a sense of how life is actually quite fragile. So the ideal conclusion after contemplating these points is that if there's something we regard as valuable, important, something we really want to do with our life, like spiritual practice, then we shouldn't procrastinate. We shouldn't think, oh, I'll do it later. I don't have time now. Because we can't be sure that there will be a later. And given the uncertainty of the time of death, the uncertainty of how long we have to live, it's best that we at least start doing some of that spiritual practice now and don't completely neglect it, because we may not ever have the time to get around to doing it. So see if that conclusion makes sense to you. That's something you can accept and feel certain about and make resolutions with respect to. as I mentioned last week, in Lama Tsongkhapa's Lamrim text, he says that this second part of the meditation on death, the uncertainty of the time of death, this is really the most important thing to meditate on, the thing that will really get us to make changes. Yeah, when I realize that, yeah, I shouldn't be complacent and take life for granted as if I'm going to be around forever. I have all the time in the world to do things. So it really makes us realize, wow, I better make sure I do start doing the things that I want to do, things that are important. And in the context of Buddhism, that really means spiritual practice, because it is spiritual practice, or dharma, what we call dharma, that helps us prepare for death, helps us to learn how to be in a good state of mind as we're dying, deal with various emotions that could come up that would make it difficult to die peacefully. So Dharma helps us with that. But also Dharma helps us for this present life. It helps us live a good life, be the best person we could be, have love and compassion, good relations with others, live ethically. So it really helps us focus on what's meaningful and valuable and important in our life. So yeah, it helps us both now in our life and also later when we do reach that point of leaving this life and going to the next one. And so, yeah, if we can see the value of Dharma, then this meditation really helps us see, oh, I better start practicing now and not think that I can put it off until some unknown time in the future. So you may not come to that conclusion from the first time you do this meditation, but if you keep meditating, keep getting more familiar with these points, hopefully that is the conclusion you will come to. And I thought to share, there's a lovely book I discovered a couple of years ago by Bhikkhu Analayo. He's a German scholar monk who's translated a lot of materials from mostly the Theravada canon, and also written books, commentaries, quite a prolific writer. One of his books, I think it's called Facing Disease and Death Mindfully, something like that. I was looking for it in our library and I couldn't find it. I think someone has borrowed it. But he has pulled out stories and statements from the Buddha's teachings, mainly the Pali, teachings. So the Buddha's own words. I always like reading the Buddha's own words. So what the Buddha himself said about different things, not just death, but also grief and pain and illness. So various aspects of, our life as we're getting older and experiencing the death of loved ones and also getting closer to our own death. So it's quite lovely. And I think if I remember correctly, there's one story in there where the Buddha was with some of his monks and he asked them how they practice mindfulness of death. And one monk said, oh, I think that I will die in a week. And so I kind of prepare myself like that. And the Buddha was like, not impressed. And another monk said something similar, but 6 days, and another one 5 days, and so on and so on. So they had similar answers about thinking, I'm going to die at a certain point and prepare myself for that. And the Buddha wasn't very pleased with their answers. And then finally, one monk said something like, with each breath. with each breath that I take, I think I might, this might be my last breath. Something like that. Like I said, I was trying to find the book to check the exact words, but I couldn't. And the Buddha was very pleased with that answer. Yeah. And this is actually one way of practicing mindfulness of death. It's used mainly in the Theravada tradition. And I found on a website a way of doing this. So while practicing mindfulness of breathing, being aware of your breath coming in and out, then you have this mindfulness. You breathe in and out as if this is your last breath. And particularly notice the end of the out breath, feeling it slip away to nothing, resting in that gap. When another in-breath begins, renew the perception that it is your last. So you pay attention to your breath coming in and going out, having this awareness that, this breath, with each breath, this breath could be my last breath, because it's definitely possible. We really never know. We might think, meditation, I'm in my meditation room and it's so peaceful here. Nothing could happen to me here, but we never know. I heard the story of one nun. I think she was a Spanish nun, and she was meditating in Bodh near the Bodhi tree where the Buddha attained enlightenment. So she was sitting there meditating, and she passed away in meditation. Yeah, so something could happen within us. I think she did have some heart issues, so I presume she had a heart attack. But yeah, that can happen. We can have a heart attack while we're meditating, or a brain bleeding in the brain, a stroke. So something could happen to us even while we're meditating. So we really can't be sure, even if we feel like we're in a safe place and we're doing something so wholesome, so virtuous, that nothing could happen to me here and now. But yeah, we just don't know. And the purpose of this is not to make us scared and anxious, but rather just to realize that this life is so fragile and so impermanent, and that we really must do our best to keep ourselves in a positive state of mind as much as we can, as often as we can, since we never know, when will be our last moment of life. So there are different ways of contemplating death and mindfulness of death. So those are a few. And last week, there was a question that came up just at the end of the class. And someone said something about how there were like people who are religious followers, and they sometimes hand out pamphlets or approach you and want you to talk to them, want to talk to you, and they sometimes use fear to get people to follow them. So I think the implication of the question was that this way of talking in Buddhism sounds similar to that we're trying to get people to be scared so that they will practice Dharma, follow the Buddha's teachings. And that, if people feel that way, if they feel that that's the approach we're making, it can put some people off. It's certainly possible. But then I was thinking, would you feel the same way if, say, there's an organization that talks about the climate crisis, about all the problems we're facing today in the world, like, excessive heat and melting of glaciers and icebergs and so on, rising oceans, all these things that are happening in our world as a result of our habits, and the so-called climate crisis. So if you heard somebody talking about that, about those kind of problems, and saying we really must make changes in the way we do things, we should really try to cut down on our use of fossil fuels and plastics and so on and so forth. So if you heard that kind of talk, would you think, oh, they're just trying to scare me, and they're just trying to get me to do what they want out of fear? They're like using fear to get me to do something. Or another example might be if, let's say, you're working in an office building, and then there's some kind of announcement that's made that there's a fire in the basement or a fire in some part of the building, and they want everyone to leave the building right now. So if you heard that kind of announcement, would you also say, oh, this is just a hoax, this isn't true. They're just trying to, scare me into doing something they want me to do, and I don't want to do it. Of course, some people do react that way. There are people who think that the climate crisis is all a hoax. They don't believe it, and they don't want to make any changes in what they're doing. And the same might happen if there's an announcement about a fire, or about, hurricane is coming, get out, move inland. There are people who just ignore these kind of announcements, and they just say, I'm not moving, I'm not going, I'm staying right here, I don't care. And so sure, there are people who ignore such warnings about possible dangers. But I don't know. My reaction is like, at least give them the benefit of the doubt. It could be true. And it's better to get out of the building, and then, maybe there isn't a fire, so you can go back again. But it's better not to get stuck in the building if it's going to burn down. So I think my thought is that if you hear these kind of warnings about possible, bad things that could happen, instead of just ignoring them and thinking that it's a hoax, to check, try to do some investigation. Is this true or not? What they are talking about, what they are warning about, is it true? Like with regard to death, I mean, we can't really deny that we're going to die. That would be very foolish. But then maybe you think, oh, but death isn't something to be worried about. We just die and that's it. So what's all this talk about death and preparing for death? So it's good to investigate, what is the reality of death? Is it something to be concerned about? So that's one thing. Check if there really is something to be concerned about. Try to investigate that. And then secondly, if there's a solution that's proposed, whoever's talking about this, if they're also proposing some solution, like this is what you can do to protect yourself, to avoid that problem, then also investigate that and check, is that really going to help me? Is that something that will help me deal with this possible problem that's coming up? So I think, that's like doing a reality check, checking the reality of this situation rather than just dismissing it like, oh, this isn't true, this is all a hoax. Good to do some investigation. And in the readings that I've done, and also in discussing with people, there seem to be two attitudes with regard to death that are not very helpful, and we should try to look out for. So one attitude people sometimes have is excessive fear. I sometimes meet people who say that they are so terrified of death, they can't even think about it. They don't want to hear about it. They don't want to read about it. They don't want to talk about it. They just want to totally avoid that whole subject. It just makes them so scared. So that's one attitude that isn't helpful because then yeah, if you just go through your life never thinking about it, talking about it, hearing about it, you know, looking for ways to prepare for it, then you'll probably not be prepared when it comes to death, and it's quite likely your mind will just be overwhelmed by fear and other emotions. So I don't think that is good. It's better to try to find ways to slowly, gradually get used to it, um, and not just totally avoid it. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Yeah. And maybe a therapist could help if you have such excessive fear that you might need help from someone to understand what this fear is all about and how to overcome it. And then another attitude people sometimes have is it's almost the opposite, where they feel a sort of complacency and even a sort of flippant attitude, like, oh, death is no big deal. You just die and that's it. There's nothing to worry about. You don't need to prepare for it. Yeah, you just die. So a Tibetan master once said, people often make the mistake of being frivolous about death and think, oh, well, death happens to everyone. It's not a big deal. It's natural. I'll be fine. That's a nice theory until one is actually dying. Yeah, so it's easy to think that way, you know, before you've ever actually had an encounter with death. And I myself used to think that way when I was young. I used to think, oh, death, no big deal, no need to worry about it. I don't know if I told this story. If I did, I'm sorry to repeat it. But when I went to my first Hopan course in Hopan Monastery in Nepal, I was back in 1974. I was 21 at that time. And one night, this is a 1 month course where we do a lot of listen to teachings and meditation and so on. So one night we were sitting meditating in a big tent. We had just this big tent that we were using, and there was an earthquake, and the ground was really shaking quite hard. And you could hear people. Kopan is on a hill, and around the hill are little villages, farms, and so on. So we could hear people screaming and children crying and dogs barking. So this situation was kind of, a little scary. And Lama Zopa Rinpoche was guiding the meditation. And he was there with us. And he suddenly said in a very serious voice, meditate on bodhicitta. And when I heard that, I thought, oh, we're going to die. This is it. We're going to die. And he's telling us to meditate on bodhicitta because that's the best thing you can be thinking about when you die. And so I couldn't think about bodhicitta. I just felt total fear, total panic. My mind just went into this state of panic. It was kind of like frozen with fear. It was really, really unpleasant. Probably the most unpleasant experience I've ever had. And I couldn't think of anything positive. I couldn't do anything positive, just raw fear. And then after a few seconds, I don't know how long it was, but the earth stopped shaking, everything calmed down, everything got quiet again. And I thought, oh, thank goodness, we're not going to die. But that very short period of time where I really thought I was going to die brought me face to face with my fear of death, which I thought I didn't have. I didn't think I was afraid of death. I had this flippant attitude, no big deal, nothing to be scared of. So then I saw that was my firsthand experience of, whoa, death is not something light, something to take lightly. And so that experience really left me with an appreciation of this meditation and the need for preparing myself for death, because I really felt 100% sure I didn't want to die like that. I didn't want to die with that state of mind of just fear and panic and not being able to think of anything positive. And so I really took this whole thing very seriously, that, yeah, we do need to prepare ourselves for death. We do need to learn how to manage our mind at that time, because it's quite likely that some very unpleasant things will come up in our mind. And if we don't know, if we don't learn how to handle our mind and disturbing thoughts and emotions, then we'll just be overwhelmed by them. And I definitely don't want to die like that. So it's your choice. You can take the risk and not do any preparation for death, and hopefully it'll be okay. But having that experience made me realize, no, this is serious business. Yeah, so I think if you see in yourself either of those two attitudes, either excessive fear or this sort of flippant attitude, then I think it's good to do more research into death. Yeah, look into it, and read books. I'll send a list of books that I think are very helpful to know more about death and how to prepare for death and so on. Because I think knowing more about death, the reality of death, getting more familiar with it will help to decrease fear, because we tend to be afraid of what we don't know, fear of the unknown. So making ourselves more familiar with death may take a while, but it will help us become more at ease, more comfortable with it. So it will help reduce excessive fear. And then for those who have this flippant attitude, I think it will help them to take death more seriously and realize that, yeah, it is important to prepare for it. So I think ideally, the most healthy and reasonable attitude that we have with regard to death is a kind of respecting respecting death, that it's something, it's something to take seriously, not excessive fear, but just realize we need to prepare ourselves for it. Yeah, we shouldn't take it lightly. May not be such an easy experience to go through. So I think the ideal attitude is in between those two extremes of excessive fear on one hand and flippancy on the other. Okay, so what I thought to do now is just explain the third part of the meditation on death, but we won't do a meditation on it tonight. We'll do it next time, but just to explain it. So it's if you could put the slides up. So this is the third main part of the meditation, and it explores this question: what helps at the time of death? So having thought about death is definite, it's definitely going to happen, and we don't know when it's going to happen, and it really could happen anytime, any day. So that naturally gives us a sense of concern, like, well, what will help me at that time? It probably won't be such an easy experience to go through. So there's three, they call them reasons, or we call them points, 3 points to contemplate here. The first one is about loved ones, like that includes family and friends. So can they help us at the time of death? So probably most people, if they think about dying, they think they would like to have their family there. They would like to have their spouse, their children, siblings, people who love them and care for them. So that's natural. And but it's good to be realistic about that. Like, how much help can they give us? They could probably help us with our physical needs, going to the doctor, taking our medicine. If we need help with bathing and dressing and eating and so on, they would for sure help us with that. And they would probably help us emotionally, doing what they can to make us more comfortable and so on. But at a certain point, as we're dying, when the process of death is actually happening, we lose our ability to connect with the outside world. We lose our ability to see, hear, speak, and even have awareness of what's going on around us. And in Tibetan Buddhism, there's an explanation of the stages that we go through as we're dying. And this is what happens. So, so as we're dying, we can no longer connect with loved ones, even if they're right there next to us, holding our hand, talking to us. We may not be aware of them. And so death, the experience of death, dying, is something we go through alone. Nobody can go with us. Nobody can share that experience with us. It's something that happens to us alone. And that probably sounds horrible, but it's something we have to accept. It's the fact. Even if somebody loves us so much and they say, I don't want you to die, I don't want you to leave, I want to go with you. Some people might say that, but it's actually not possible. Yeah, nobody can go with us in that journey through dying and the next life. So what our friends, family, and so on can do for us is limited. And then secondly, can wealth and possessions help? So we accumulate money and also property, possessions, usually a house and clothes and things and so on. And those things give us comfort and happiness, enjoyment during our life. But as we are dying, we can't take any of those things with us. We have to leave them all behind. Even, we can't even take 1 cent with us. So we know that intellectually, but it's good to realize that ahead of time, that, we're going to have to leave all those things behind. Because otherwise, if we have a lot of attachment and clinging to our money, our possessions, and so on, that can make it very difficult to die peacefully. We feel, I don't want to leave. What's going to happen to my things? We may start worrying if other people will take care of them properly and who's going to get what and so on. So actually, it's good to make a will. And you don't have to be old to make a will. You can make a will at any point in your life, but it's really good to do that. If you have something to give away, make a document to decide, declare who gets what. And that way you don't have to worry about that at the time of death. You've already decided that, it's clear. So you can just say goodbye to all that stuff. So just to realize that, our wealth, our possessions, our most cherished pair of shoes, jacket, knick-knack, phone, computer, book, okay, these things that we cherish so much. And they do give us enjoyment while we're alive, but to realize, none of those things can go with us. And they probably also can't help us as we are dying. We may not be able to use them. Often you're so weak at the time of death, you can't even hold something in your hands. You lose your ability to see and hear. So, you probably won't be able to talk on your phone. So just to realize, those things have to be left behind. And then number 3 is our body. So our body is something that's been with us right from the beginning of our life. It's our constant companion, and during our life, we use it for all kinds of fun things. We have a lot of fun, a lot of enjoyment with our body. But that's also, that has to be left behind too. Death, according to Buddhism, death is the separation of our mind and our body. our mind, our consciousness leaves the body and goes away to take another life, another rebirth, and the body's left behind as a corpse to be buried, burned, cremated, whatever. So yeah, just to realize that we can't take our body with us. And if we have strong attachment to our body, if we have strong identification with our body, this is me, this is who I am, yeah, then that can make it very difficult at the time of death. So contemplating these 3 points can also help us realize that, yeah, attachment, if we have strong attachment to the things of this life, including our loved ones, or, people, and our possessions, our body, then that attachment will make it difficult for us to die peacefully and just let go and leave this life and go to the next one. So the point here is to realize that, none of these things can help us, can really help us at the time of death. What can help us is Dharma. So Dharma is spiritual practice, spiritual teachings. Dharma can help us at the time of death in various ways. One is if we have learned certain practices during our life, we have become familiar with certain practices, even just a mantra like Om Mani Padme Hum, or taking refuge in the Buddha. These are practices from the Buddhist tradition, but every religion has certain practices that people do that can help them keep their mind in a good state. And if they do those practices during their life, then at the time of death, they can remember those practices, do those practices, and that will help them be in a state of mind that's positive and peaceful and able to face death and go to the next life in a good way. So that's one way that Dharma helps us at the time of death. It's something that enables us to put our mind into a positive state, a peaceful state, for that transition from this life to the next. And then another way Dharma helps us is because, according to Buddhism, we will have another life after this one, and the circumstances of that life depend on the way we live this life. If we do a lot of virtue, create a lot of virtue, a lot of good deeds, live a good life, we're creating good karma. That will be the cause for a fortunate rebirth in our next life. On the other hand, if we create a lot of bad karma, we lie, cheat, kill, steal, do things that are unethical, unvirtuous, then we're creating the cause for unfortunate circumstances in our next life. So learning Dharma and practicing Dharma in our life will enable us to be able to die with a state of peace and certainty. Oh, I lived a good life. So what's coming next? What will happen next will be fortunate, good situation rather than something unfortunate. Okay, so that's the meditation. And like I say, we won't do it tonight. We'll do it next week. But like I say, the ideal conclusion to come to by contemplating these points is that we need to do spiritual practice, and to do it purely, to try to keep our practice pure, meaning free of worldly concerns, like the 8 worldly concerns, being attached to gain and fame and what people think of us, praise and so on. So try to keep our mind free of those kind of worldly attitudes, which are basically attachment and aversion, right? Liking this and not liking that. So practicing Dharma purely isn't easy, but we need to at least try to do that. And yeah, so I thought to start talking about some actual ways that we can, things we can do in our life to help us be prepared for death. So there's a lot of these. I'll start tonight and then continue next week. So the next slide, this is from a book called Facing Death and Finding Hope by Christine Longacre. I read this book many years ago and I loved it. It's great. So she was married and her husband died of leukemia. And I think both of them must have been fairly young, like in their 20s. They had a 1-year-old child. So that means she lost her husband at a really young age. Probably hadn't been married long. And it was a very difficult experience for her. She, felt a lot of grief. But as it seems, as a result of that, she got interested in hospice work and started helping people who were dying. And then after 20 years of hospice work, she wrote this book. So this book is based on her experience of, working with death and dying for 20 years. And she was also a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner, but she doesn't really bring in Tibetan Buddhism in a very overt way in the book. There's little hints of it here and there, but it's something that's secular. I think, anyone could make sense of what she's saying, whether they accept Buddhism or not. And so in this book, she talks about what she calls 4 tasks of living and dying. So these 4 tasks are things that we can work on ourselves to prepare for death. And they will also enhance the quality of our life. And these are also tasks that we can help others. So if we know people who are dying and would like to assist them being more prepared for death, then we could try to help them engage in these 4 tasks as well. So I'll just explain them briefly. She elaborates on them in the book with lots of stories and examples, and very, very helpful. But I'll just introduce these 4 tasks here, and if you're interested, you can read more about them in her book. So the first is understanding and transforming suffering. So basically what this means is coming to accept that there is suffering in life, there are problems in life. I mean, some people have the idea that they can go through life and everything will be wonderful and rosy and perfect and they will never have any problems. But this is unrealistic. I mean, there's nobody who can avoid problems in life. So problems and suffering are an inevitable, unavoidable aspect of our life. And there are unhealthy ways of responding to suffering and problems, such as getting depressed, falling into despair, trying to escape with alcohol, drugs, or entertainment or food, and getting angry and blaming others and so on. So those ways of responding when problems happen aren't helpful and just make more problems, make things worse. And so a wiser approach would be to understand suffering and problems and learn how to transform them. And this is important in preparing for death because as we are getting closer to the end of our life and actually actively dying, there probably will be suffering. There could be physical suffering, physical pain or discomfort, or just the loss of abilities, things we used to be able to do and we can no longer do. And then there's probably also some mental suffering, some emotional suffering. Not everybody has physical suffering, but yeah, emotionally, just seeing our life coming to an end, things falling apart, uh, facing the separation from your loved ones, and so on and so forth. So mentally, emotionally, it could be quite difficult. So there most probably will be some suffering as we approach death. And if we've never learned how to have a healthy attitude about suffering and a healthy way of dealing with suffering, then we won't do very well. Yeah, we'll just become very unhappy and maybe angry, depressed, despair, and so on. And that's totally unnecessary, because there are things we can do about suffering and problems to make them better. It's all a question of working with our mind. And you're probably familiar with this if you've been listening to teachings or learning teachings from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. There's this whole area that's called transforming problems into happiness, or transforming problems into the path. So there are ways that we can work with problems and difficulties such that instead of getting unhappy, depressed, angry, and so on, we can make them part of our spiritual practice and help our mind to grow, to develop on the path. So one example of that, one that I really like, is compassion. Using a problem to increase our compassion. Because, we're most probably not the only person in the world who's having a problem like whatever we're having. There's probably millions of other people who have this same kind of problem. And if you can remember that, remind yourself of that, and think, oh, lots of other people are going through a problem like this. And now I know what it's like. I can understand what they're going through, because I'm going through it too. And then you can use that to contemplate compassion and generate compassion for all the other people who are suffering with this same kind of problem. So you're taking the focus away from yourself, instead of being, oh, poor me, this is so awful, this is so terrible, I'm really suffering so much. Instead of focusing just on me, you're turning your attention to others and generating compassion. And there's other practices you can do, like Tonglen, taking and giving. Maybe I can talk about that next time, but that's a meditation where you imagine taking away the suffering of others and giving them happiness. So it's a really beautiful practice. And that's something you can do when you have a problem yourself. It's a way of transforming that problem into something beneficial for yourself and for others and for your spiritual practice. So that's just one example of a practice for transforming problems. And if we start learning this now while we're alive, with we can start with little problems that we may have, like a headache, or there's a mosquito buzzing around bothering us, or it's too hot or too cold, or whatever, any problem we may face in our daily life. So if we work with those problems and get used to transforming them into something beneficial, something that's part of our practice, then we get used to that, doing that. And if we keep doing that again and again and again, it becomes a habit, becomes familiar. So then by the time we get to the end of our life and we're experiencing probably bigger problems than we've ever had, then we already know how to use them, how to bring them into the path, use them to have compassion, and so on. So, yeah. This doesn't mean, however, that we cannot use methods to deal with suffering. Like, for example, if there's pain, some people might say, but if you're in pain, does that mean you have to just meditate? You can't take any pain medication? No, it doesn't mean that. I've never heard a lama say, no pain medication. Don't take any pain medication. It's not allowed. Some people have that idea. I mean, maybe there's some teachers who say that. I don't know. But I specifically asked one of my teachers, Ruba Rinpoche, about that. And he said, what? Like, where's that coming from? He said, of course you can take medication. So it's fine. Yeah, if you want to, you can take medication for pain. But it doesn't always work. Yeah, there might still be some pain there. Or it may work, but it may take a while before it kicks in. So while there's still some suffering there, then you can use spiritual methods, Dharma methods, to deal with those. Then number 2 is making a connection, healing relationships, and letting go. So this has to do with our relationships with others, especially family and friends. Sometimes things can go wrong in our relationships. We have quarrels, conflicts, and we might even cut ourselves off, stop talking to people, holding on to grudges, bad feelings, and so on. And if that happens in our life, and if we don't take care of those problems, if we don't try to heal them, then that can be problematic as we're dying. Yeah, we might think of those people and think of our anger and our bad feelings, maybe feel regret, maybe wish that we had apologized and tried to clear up that problem. So it could be a cause of worry and unhappiness as we're dying. And so it's much better to try to deal with those problems while we're alive, while we still have a chance to do so. Don't leave it till the end. It might be too late. So, do whatever you can to heal rifts, wounds in relationships. And it doesn't require the other person's cooperation. We might think, well, I'm willing to, talk, but they don't want to talk to me. Sometimes it's like that. Yeah. That's that's okay. Even if the other person doesn't want to talk to you, doesn't want to have anything to do with you, you can still work on your own mind, your own thoughts and feelings towards that person. And I mean, it may take a while, but learn forgiveness, try to develop compassion, love, try to clear away any bad feelings, any negative feelings that might be in your mind towards that person. So that's something you can do on your own. So that's really important to do so that your mind is at peace as much as possible before you pass away. And then number 3 is preparing spiritually for death. So this means learning spiritual practice, at least one kind of spiritual practice while we're alive, but it could be a variety of spiritual practices. So learning those while we're alive, practicing them so that we're very familiar with them. And then even if death happens like very suddenly, like, in a plane crash or car crash or something, you have only a few seconds before death happens. But if you've really familiarized yourself with some practice, taking refuge in Buddha or Tara or Chenrezig and reciting their mantra, then even in a few seconds, that can come to your mind and enable you to be in a positive state of mind. So next week, I will go through some examples of spiritual practices that we can do while we're alive that will help us prepare for death, but also help us in our life. If we have a spiritual element in our life, that will be a source of peace and happiness and improve relationships with others. So yeah, it'll bring a lot of good to our life in addition to preparing for death. So I'll elaborate on that next week. And then number 4 is finding meaning in life. So she says that many people go through life without a clear understanding of why are we here? What's the purpose of life? What's the purpose of our existence, the meaning of our existence? They just kind of, go on automatic, do all the things that they're supposed to do, go to school, get a job, get married, have a family, and so on and so on and so on, and never really answer that question, like, why am I here? What is the purpose of life? And this can become a problem as you get older, especially, things are kind of falling apart. Your kids have grown up and they've moved out and they got their own families, and maybe your spouse has already passed away and you're not working anymore, and you might feel like kind of useless. Yeah. And so if you've never come to an understanding of why am I here? What is the purpose of my life? This can lead to depression, despair, and also loneliness. A lot of people in their later years of life can be quite unhappy mentally, emotionally, psychologically, because they haven't really thought about this. So it's good to explore questions like, what is the purpose of my life? Why am I here? What is important and not important? So, Buddhism has answers to that. Other religions have answers to that, but it's good to explore that on our own and come to our own, understanding of, why am I alive? What is it that, drives me and keeps me going and brings joy, happiness, sense of meaning into my life. So like I said, this is just a brief overview of that book, but I think it's a very helpful book for yourself, and also if you're facing the death of someone else, trying to help someone else close to you who's dying. So we've run out of time, and we have one more class next week. So I'll talk about more specific ways of bringing a spiritual element into our life that can help us prepare for death and also help us now while we're alive. There's a few minutes left. If somebody has a question you'd like to ask. Hi, Barry.
Hi, this relates to the past 2 weeks. We began with a meditation, and you would ask us to focus on our motivation for being in the class and for meditating. And you were suggesting the benefits of compassion and wanting to help others. And I would become confused because my motivation for the class was a little less, at a lower level, maybe wanting to find a Sangye, wanting to deal with my personal relation, how I relate to death, and several other things, and not quite as altruistic. I am altruistic at some points in my life. I'm not totally selfish, but it's not my basic motivation. And I don't know, when you say the motivation, do I then go to the ideal of what would be higher, like compassion, or do I accept where I am at the moment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. In the tradition, Tibetan Buddhist tradition, especially with teachers like Lama Zopa Rinpoche and the Dalai Lama and so on there. Well, most teachers in our tradition, they're always encouraging us to develop altruism, compassion, love, be motivated to help others, not only ourselves. And I know that for a lot of people that they're not at that point. Yeah, they have their own needs and things they need to take care of for themselves. So that's completely fine. So one way around that would be to think, yeah, I I I would like to help others. I also have a lot of needs and I do want to help myself. But helping yourself doesn't exclude helping others. So you can bring both in. You can think, yeah, I have things that I want to do, needs that I have to be fulfilled. And as much as possible, I would like to help others as well. So you might consider that, um, and also you can think, well, if I can learn more about how to prepare for death, how to live a good life, then I'll be in a position where I can help others. I can, share what I've learned with other people too. So the idea is to try to get beyond being totally 100% self-centered, only thinking about me, but try to think about me and others.
Yeah,
Me and others.
I don't want, like, I felt uncomfortable denying of why I came to the class. Not that, that I didn't help the blind person crossing the street. I don't want to come off that I'm the most selfish person in the world, but it was what led me to take the class at the moment I decided to do it. And it was less than the highest altruism. And it's really helpful. Kind of, I guess you could kind of think at the same time or during the same meditation of this is where I am, this is where I'd like to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's fine to compose your own motivation, something that really comes from your heart and includes ideas and feelings that you can relate to. So don't worry if, your motivation isn't exactly what somebody else's motivation is. It's much better if it's real and genuine and it comes from your heart. And it is important to be honest. Like, yeah, I do want to help others, but right now I have a lot of needs. I need to take care of certain things for myself. And yeah, when I can do that, then I'll probably be able to help others more. So just being honest about that, that's completely fine. So because this class is a little bit short, I don't have the time to go into everything, but I often do tell people that, yeah, when it comes to motivation, feel free to compose your own, using words and ideas that you're comfortable with and that feel right to you. And it could change, maybe next year it will be different. 5 years from now, again, different. So please feel free to do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good question. Yeah, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, the spiritual founder of the FPMT, this organization that Shantideva is part of, he's really, well, he's passed away now, but he was such a bodhisattva, always thinking about others and always encouraging others to have altruism, compassion, love, and so on. So very much emphasized in that tradition. Okay. So,
Wonderful.
yeah.
We do have one question from Yuko. She put it in the chat. She says, or Yuko, do you want to read it? You're muted, Yuko.
Okay.
Yeah,
I would like.
I am a Japanese, and we tended to think that killing ourselves for the honor of ourselves and then tended to beautify committing suicide. How does the Buddhist think about committing suicide?
There's not a whole lot of explanation about suicide, but generally it's considered not a good thing to do because as having a human life, being a human being is something very, very precious. and also very rare compared with all the other beings, you know? So it's like we're really fortunate. The Buddhist view is we're very, very fortunate to have a human body, a human life, because we have the best situation in which we can develop our Buddha nature, our potential for enlightenment. And if we destroy this life, we don't know what our next life will be. We can't be sure we'll have another life like this one. And so it's considered, you know, try to keep yourself alive and you know, not destroy your life as much as possible. Of course, there's lots of, you know, other issues, like if you're in great pain, if you're unable to do a lot of things, what's the word, disabled, seriously disabled, and maybe a burden, you feel like you're a burden on your family and things like that. So that's, you know, circumstances like that may be different, but I'm just saying in general, that's the Buddhist view, that it's best to keep yourself alive. If you have difficulties or problems, find solutions for them so that you can be happier and have an enthusiasm to go on living and so on. So I don't know if that's answering your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's complex. But that's the basic understanding that I have. Okay, so let's conclude by making a mental dedication of the positive energy of coming together with a good motivation and looking at these teachings and ways in which we can be a better person, be more helpful to others, and so on, and find a place in our life for spiritual practice. So this has all been something very meaningful, worthwhile, beneficial. So let's dedicate the merit, the positive energy we've created here, sharing it with all other beings, wishing that all beings could find happiness, freedom from suffering and the causes of suffering, and may it help all of them become awakened, enlightened as soon as possible. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Venerable.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Beautiful teaching. Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sunny. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
See you next week for the last class.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you have any last questions, you can send them to the center and I'll do my best to answer them. And I will send a list of books related to this subject that if you know, you might want to look into.
And
But-
also, I just wanted to mention that we do have a program called Dharma Office Hours, that if you want to have a private meeting with Venerable, you can sign up and do that. And that will be actually the week following our last class. It's on the 9th, I think. So it's on the website, so you can check it out. I just wanted to give you a reminder, and maybe we'll send out an email so you can think about it too. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Yuko.
Thank you, Sunny.
Good question. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you next week.